Hi, I'm Kelly and welcome to Women at Iowa. Women at Iowa was started so that the University of Iowa community could come together and women could take pride in each other's accomplishments. Our guest today is a professor in theater arts, in directing, and theater history. She's taken a special focus in theater for social outreach and under her tutelage that has prospered at the University of Iowa community in the last few years. So please join me welcoming our guest, Tisch Jones.
Hello.
Hello, Tish. It's great to have you with us.
Great to see you.
I had a question for you. I was looking over some of your background. You had a profile run on in you in the University of Iowa Be Remarkable. I believe it was on the University of Iowa website. Mm-hmm. And they looked into your roots and your history.
Yes.
And you have kind of a wide variety of places that you've lived when you were younger. And New Orleans was one of them that you had referenced as being where your hub is, I believe is how you put it.
Yes. I consider New Orleans home. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean I've lived any significant length of time in New Orleans.
Right.
I was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, mm-hmm. and I was born to a concert pianist. My mother was a concert pianist, and my daddy, when I was 6 years old, died of this horrible disease. And she had to suddenly go back to graduate school to get a terminal degree to help take care of me.
Right.
So I was sort of tossed between the grandparents and the aunts and uncles and my mother while she was trying to further her career as a concert pianist as well as go to graduate school. One of the problems is that, you know, today when we go to school, we typically take our children with us. We don't have to leave them.
Right.
But I have, over the years, come to understand that I got left at the homes of many other people because, for example, when my mother came here to get her PhD, black students didn't have anywhere to stay. In fact, the year she came was the year they had first integrated the dorm.
Really?
Yeah, and
What
that
year
was
was
in 1950s.
Really?
But she couldn't bring a child, and so it just wasn't conducive to take a child with you during those days. So as a result, I ended up going to 11 schools from 1st to 12th grade.
Wow.
But when my mother would, you know, go back home and say, okay, we're going home, we were in New Orleans because that's where she grew up. And typically that's where my grandparents were because my grandfather was a Louisiana minister of the United Methodist Church. And so we would always be in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So that New Orleans. So that's why it's the only place I know to call home. The only other place I've lived any substantial length of time, which I would say is a second home, might be Iowa City. Yeah. Believe it or not.
And is that why you came to the University of Iowa? Your mother's roots here?
Well, my mother was working on a PhD. She started working on it when I was 10 years old. 5th grade. She says, I got to get a PhD because they won't give you a lot of money if you don't have that terminal degree.
Right.
Then she used to joke and say, well, by the time she graduates from high school, I'd probably be finishing it then, and I shouldn't because I got to be able to make money for her to go to college. And as it turned out, I graduated from Iowa City High School in June of 1966. She got her PhD in August of 66. So as it turned out, I came here my last 2 years because we would be able to stay in housing, we thought. But when we came, it turns out that they had just passed a fair housing ordinance in Iowa City. And my mother and I would go from place to place to place trying to get an apartment.
Right.
And people would say things to us like, well, we don't rent to single women, or, well, you're not a married person and therefore we don't rent. I mean, they would come up with any reason why not to rent to us. So my mother went to the university housing office and said, I thought that there was a fair housing ordinance just passed in Iowa City. And I am finding that in spite of that, we can't find a place to live because they consider us to be two single women and not a mother and a daughter.
Right.
So what do you think I am? And they said, well, we consider your mother and daughter, and well, maybe we could put you in married student housing, but you're going to have to be on the waiting list. So how long is the waiting list? Well, obviously it was quite long at that point. And so my mother said, well, we're just going to sit in here until you find a place for us since we can't find one in Iowa City. So they got tired of us sitting there, and the next thing you knew, we were living in the Quonset hut apartments. They were like those Army barracks tin
Yeah.
with a pot-belly oil stove in the middle. And so my junior, senior year of high school was spent in that Quonset hut, and I would get on that bus where Hampshire is now, because that's where it was.
Yeah.
I'd get on that bus in the morning and take that bus all the way to City High.
Very good. And then you did your undergraduate education in Minnesota, correct?
Yes, my mother was teaching at the University of Minnesota, and it was more cost efficient to go to University of Minnesota. Because you want to know something funny?
What?
When I finished high school here, I was not in-state anywhere in this country.
At all?
Nowhere. Because I had lived so many places, I was an out-of-state student everywhere. Minnesota, when my mother got hired, allowed me as the offspring of a professor to be in-state. So that's why it was more cost efficient.
No, you were talking right before we started interviewing, and I'd overheard you talking to one of the producers about putting on the first black show at Minnesota.
Yes, when I was at University of Minnesota, I was one of maybe about 4 black theater majors, and it was quite a large department. In Minnesota, it was quite a large university. I think at one point it used to be the largest in the Big Ten.
Really?
But they hired, while I was there, a black professor, Horace Bond. And significantly, Horace Bond is of the famous Bond family, Julian Bond. That was his cousin, and, you know, very famous. But he was the first black theater professor, and he directed the first black plays at the University of Minnesota. And I did a one-woman show as part of a series of 4 one-acts called Sister Sanji by Sonia Sanchez.
Great. And do you want to talk a little bit about that show and your roles in it? And
well, that was the revolutionary period, you know, and Sister Sanji was a woman who was fighting for the revolution and fighting to make it so that we took over as a group of people, and caused a lot of problems, because that was a period of time when the Black Panthers and Black Power had everybody a little scared, you know, because we were about overthrowing the government to make it right, you know. And so, of course, everybody was upset. So I can remember that the students at Minnesota were quite threatened by the plays, because they felt that it advocated violence. But, you know, considering where black people were at that point in time, we had to do something to scare people so that we could, you know, let's get rid of some of this oppression. You know, I mean, we want the rights to do what everybody else in this country that calls themselves an American, we want those rights. But yet, you know, people didn't see it, didn't understand. And then there was the Vietnam War demonstrations that were going on. But, you know, the thing about that period is I found students to just, they had a lot of guts back then. You know, a lot of my colleagues at that time were trying to not be drafted to go to Vietnam. So what your number was very important. Do you have a high number or a low number? And maybe if I stay in school, you know, anything. But I can remember the anti-war protest on Minnesota's campus, and I was a mother by that time, had a son, and I was taking him home from nursery school, and somebody, I think it was National, dropped tear gas on the campus. And I was like way away from the campus, but just tear gas really gets you at a distance. Even if you're at a distance, you get it. And I remember people running into my house to get their eyes flushed. And my son just, you know, but I remember that period. But it was a vitally energetic period.
And you yourself had a lot of guts during that period, too. You actually were arrested for standing up for civil rights.
Well, that was even before I went to Minnesota. See, by the time I was in Minnesota, I was an adult. Before I moved to Iowa City, Iowa, my mother was teaching at South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And so I spent my 9th and 10th grade years there. And at the time, there was a very major civil rights movement going on at Orangeburg. And of course, my mother was one of the participants, and most of the college students. And I was a part of a group. You've heard of the Little Rock Nine. Well, there was the Orangeburg 12. We went through the courts with the NAACP trying to desegregate Orangeburg school system. And I was part of the landmark case. And in the meantime, while we were fighting the case, we were also picketing downtown. And at 15, at 15, particularly that year, I went to jail 7 times, of which one of those times I was placed in the bullpen. And in retrospect, I'm saying, good grief, I was in this bullpen.
What exactly is the bullpen?
It's just that. It's like, think of a kennel, like a cage. Yeah. And they put me in it, along with my girlfriend, Lerma. Our mothers were, very big people in the movement. And I guess they wanted to really use us as an example of what happens when you go to jail too much. And they put us in the bullpen. And I remember that the real prisoners were outside the bullpen looking at us. And we were in the bullpen, and if you wanted to go to the bathroom, they'd bring you a jar, and all these men would, be there. And I mean, we're 15-year-old little girls, and at the time, it didn't really hit me that we were really in danger. I mean, yes, there had been the Birmingham bombing and all of those things that had happened, but we felt this was so important that, we were willing to die for the cause. Yeah. That following summer, I ended up being in Birmingham, and that was after the Birmingham bombing, where I really worked very heavily with voter registration in Birmingham. So I grew up at that period of time being an activist with the civil rights movement, because I'm from a mother who's an activist, who's from a parent that's an activist. So I've come from generations of women that have been activists.
Were you ever truly frightened, as you were getting arrested, frightened for your life, or frightened for your safety with the police officers?
The moment I think I might have been afraid is we had a big major demonstration one day downtown. What would happen is you had regular mass meetings in the church. And I don't know which day of the week it was, but we were screaming, "Do you want your freedom? Certainly, Lord. Do you want your freedom? Will you go to jail? Certainly, Lord. Will you?" Then finally the man went, "Will you go to jail? Yeah. Will you go to jail? Yeah. Let's go." All of a sudden, this whole church full of people that's been singing the song, "Will you go to jail? Yeah."
Yeah.
Well, like, you had to walk the walk. Did you, or else, a lot of people ducked out the back door. I'll be real. Some people were scared. But those of us that were young people, I went to my mother, "Can we go? Can we go?" And we all went marching silently with our signs down to have a pray-in in the square of the downtown. And I can remember getting to the square, and we started singing, "Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom after a while." And the police were there. Somebody had tipped them off that we were coming. Some snitch. And so they were there with the guards, with the guns, and they also had the fire hoses there. Now, it was raining, so we were already wet. But they're out there with the fire hoses, and they had already fire hosed a bunch of people in Orangeburg at another previous civil rights movement. So, there was the fire trucks. I think the one moment I was afraid, but I didn't know I was afraid, was when the police told us all to shut up and be quiet and to go back. And everybody shut up except me. I could not stop singing "Oh, Freedom." And the police came to me and said, "Shut up, I told you to shut up." And I said, "Before I be a slave." I couldn't stop singing, so I must have been afraid. He caught me by the neck, threw me in the street, and threw me in the police car, and then my mother came running out into the streets. "That's my daughter you're arresting. If you arrest my daughter, you got to arrest me too." And so they arrested her too. But I think that was the moment in retrospect, sometimes you're so involved in the moment, you don't know you're afraid. But that's why I couldn't stop singing.
You overcome that fear.
I just couldn't stop singing because I was so afraid. I don't know. That's the only time I can think of. But we were trained how to deal. I mean, my children have not been trained how to be on a picket line, how to sit in, how to hold yourself when you are doing, peaceful demonstrations. We knew what to say, what not to say, how to hold our face, how to look, where to put the eyes. We had been very well trained.
Right. It's almost like acting in a way.
It
And
was
like holding a presence, holding a stage presence.
Well, we would, they would put us through. Okay, so if somebody comes and slaps you, what do? You turn the other cheek and just say, "I love you, brother," and keep going. Somebody spits in your face, what do? "I love you, brother," keep going. And you just keep, and you learned how to protect your face if they start beating on you, or, it was nonviolence, which there were people that thought we were crazy.
How can you do that? How can you find in your heart that forgiveness and be able to say that, "I love you"?
I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And the Christian church was kind of, for the black church, was very important in the civil rights movement. That's where all the meetings and everything happened.
Yeah.
That's why that church got bombed in Birmingham. It was probably the heart of one of the major civil rights, committees.
Yeah.
And all the activism came out of the church.
You had your grandfather, and was your father also a minister?
No,
as well?
not my father. My
grandfather
grandfather was a
was.
minister. I come from a long line of ministers. My grandmother's father was a minister as well.
Yeah. Did you ever think about going into ministry?
As a woman, we never thought of that, really. Although my grandmother, which is interesting, always wanted to be a missionary. And she was going to be a playwright, to write religious plays for the missions. And that's very interesting to me, that I never understood she wanted to be a playwright. And she didn't. And I actually have notes when she went to college. I have her playwriting class notes. I have her directing class notes. And I never realized, because I would have talked to her about it. And here I am in theater. But she instead became a minister's wife and one of the best music teachers in the city of New Orleans.
Now, I had taken a class with you, and you had mentioned Hrotsvita, the first recorded women's playwright, and she had written Christian plays. Were you interested in Hrotsvita at all because of your grandmother's story?
No, I'm always interested in the first.
The firsts.
The first woman, the first black person, the first black woman, the first black man, the first Spanish, I'm always interested in those people that were the shakers.
What are you a first of?
Oh my goodness, why would you ask me that? I don't know, to be quite honest. I wouldn't know. I think that would be for other people to say.
Yeah.
I do know one thing I am. I do know a first that I am. I am the first black all-state pianist in the state of Iowa, and I am the only all-state pianist from Iowa City High School.
That's incredible. That is incredible.
That's one thing I did.
Did your mother teach you?
Oh, my grandmother.
Your grandmother?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from a long line of musicians. I grew up in a family where my grandmother's belief was every child, to be a completely educated person, had to play piano, one-string instrument, and type. So all of us know how to play piano, and we all play a string instrument, and we type. And I'm going to tell you, that was a smart lady, because when theater wasn't feeding me, piano was. I've been a church organist. I've taught piano lessons. I mean, that kept me going before theater paid me.
Now, you ended up in the theater. I had heard in the past that you had dabbled around with possibly pursuing medicine and looking into science. When
I flunked chemistry at Iowa City High School, that was into that one. But no, it had happened before then. I guess I said what every young black child in the day said. When I grew up, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher. Those are the creditable things to say.
Right.
You didn't tell people that you were going to be a theater person or be an actress. I mean, you didn't see anybody on television that looked like you, so why would you say it?
Right.
But that's what I, in the darkest of my heart, wanted to do. And when I was in 9th grade in Orangeburg, when I wasn't picketing, we did a musical called Bye Bye Birdie. And I played the role of Rose Alvarez. And up to that point, I had always said, I'm going to be a pediatrician. I'm going to be a this. I'm going to find the cure for sickle cell anemia, things like that. And I came off the stage one night and told my mother, oh, I enjoyed it so much, I could do this the rest of my life. She said, fine, when you go to college, major in theater. I had never dawned on me you could go to college. I was living on a college campus, mind you, but it had never dawned on me you could go to college and major on theater. And my mother, she didn't say I couldn't do it. She just said, go to college, major in theater. And from then on, I said, okay. And so I pursued what I was passionate about at a time when you didn't see anybody that looked like me, just like Obama didn't see anybody that looked like him. But, you pursued it anyway. Nothing got in your way. You just figured that you could do it.
Yeah.
And I, in spite of all odds, I somehow have made my living in the arts.
What brought you back to the University of Iowa campus?
The first time I came back was when this is an interesting story. Probably first time it'll ever be recorded. I was in the MFA acting program. I went through Erdis to be a part of the MFA acting program somewhere. I had a son. I was a single mother. And Iowa was one of the schools that offered me entrance into their MFA acting program. And since I had lived here and I was coming with a child, I figured it made more sense to come here. I had support systems here. Vice President Hubbard, I had known, he was like a second father to me in the Bill Nusser at Hand's Jewelry Store, had been my Sunday school teacher.
Really?
Mr. Jablonski was McCoy. I mean, I had support systems. So I felt that this was a place I could come and have support systems. And so I entered the MFA acting program here at the University of Iowa. I was so proud to be here. But as you know, you're here for a year and then they decide whether to keep you or not. Well, at the end of my first year, in that March when we went to have our evaluations, the man that was my advisor basically told me they were going to have to let me go because it was his moral duty to let me go because I had no survivable talent in the theater. Yep, he told me that. I had no survivable talent in the theater. I was crushed. I was so crushed. In the meantime, I met my husband. Instead of getting the MFA, I ended up with an MRS, moved to New Haven, Connecticut. And I worked like mad trying to get a job in a factory or anything else since I had no survivable talent in theater. But I couldn't get any work in anything but the arts, no matter what I did. And before you knew it, I was actually working for Lloyd Richards at Yale Repertory Theater. I was directing. I was doing all kinds of theater work and known for it.
No survivable talent.
But I had no survivable talent. So somewhere along the line, my husband decided to come back to Iowa on a professional development. He was an economist because Ishishi was here teaching in economics, and he wanted to study for a year into Ishishi, and I had to come whether I liked it or not. And of course, I didn't want to come because the way they had treated me. But they said, well, you can at least come and get an MA. So I came to get an MA, but while I was here, they asked me to direct Black Action Theater while I was here. And so I finished my MA, evidently directed a lot of productions that people just kept looking at me like, wow, that's fabulous. And all of a sudden, Robert Headley said to me, why don't you stick around and get an MFA in directing? And I was stunned. I went like, but I don't have any survivors. He looked at me, he said, what? What do you mean? Well, the people at that point, they didn't know anything about my history. It had been years since all that had happened, and all the people that had gotten rid of that whole class that I was in, they weren't here anymore. So this was a new group of people. So I'm here being invited into the MFA program, and I looked at him, I said, well, I think I got to go back to Connecticut. Is that okay if I come back one day later? He said, sure. So I went, and that's when I started working at Yale Rep. I was involved with August Wilson and the 3 August Wilson plays. I was doing professional work, doing some South African plays. I was just doing work all over the place. And then Bob Headley every now and then would call me on the phone. So have you decided if you want to come back? No, I'm having another baby right now. I can't come. So finally, Lloyd Richards was at his 10th year. And at Yale Repertory, the deans can only be there 10 years and then 2 more years to pick the successor. Well, I didn't want to be working with anyone else, but you know what Lloyd Richards is. I mean, he's the first Black man to direct on Broadway. He directed the original Raisin the Sun and, of course, instrumental in putting August Wilson out there. Well, I didn't want to work for anyone else but Lloyd, so I figured, okay, now my daughter's about 3, so maybe this is time. So I came back here with my 3 children, and got an MFA after being told you have no survivable talent.
And here
I am being, in fact, I came back under an invitation, but I basically was brought in, I was called and brought in as an invited hire in the department. And I just think that says a lot that, you know, somebody can slap you down really hard, but to be able to be here and say I'm a faculty member at the University of Iowa, having been told by the University of Iowa I had no survivable talent, is kind of amazing. And I was embarrassed about that story for years, not realizing that I'm proud of the fact that I survived it.
And here you are, years later, still at the University of Iowa.
I survived, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. No, you directed a very acclaimed show last year, and there was a very special reason behind it. The piano lesson. You directed The Piano Lesson by August Wilson. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of the year that you did the piece, why you did the piece, and why here, why now?
Well, I think the theater department knew that for some reason, every time we do August Wilson at the University of Iowa, it sells out like you wouldn't believe. But it turned out to really be very important last year, because last year was a good year to look at legacy and to look at the legacy that had been left. I mean, when we look at this year, even for election, you know, it's almost like a preview to where we are now. It's the legacy that Obama stands on, the backs of all of those people that struggled in the civil rights movement. Even he himself says that, although he didn't run as a black president. But to see someone like that there, but you go back and look at something like Piano Lesson and the history and the importance of legacy. And in particular, for America to start embracing history that they think is not their history. Like when you, I don't believe, and I think you've taken classes from me, you probably have heard me say that I don't like to say I teach African American theater history. I like to say I teach American theater history. Because what is African American is American. So therefore, but the only reason we have this special course is because it's been kind of left out. And I think that Piano Lesson helps to emphasize the need to embrace our legacies, you know, that embrace all of our legacies, all of our histories, our Latino history, our female history, our African American Asian history. We need to understand it's not these particular, it's American. And that's what America is. If you have all white European history, it's not American.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's not who we are.
You mentioned Barack Obama a couple times so far in the interview.
Yes, I'm a big Obama fan.
Oh, I know you were incredibly excited. We had had a discussion when we met at the caucuses about Barack Obama, and you had a lot to say about what he would stand for the American people. I'm
going to tell you what I put on my Facebook. Oh, I think I put it on my Facebook. No, I put it on my Facebook. I have always felt that we needed to have an apology for the history of slavery. We needed some kind of reparations for what our forefathers went through. I don't need an apology anymore. The election of Barack Obama took care of the apology for me. For me, I finally feel I'm an American. When Michelle Obama made the statement that she, for the first time after Iowa, she felt like an American, people criticized her, but you have to understand, black people in this country, we didn't have as much of the pie as anybody else, so we didn't feel like we belong. And now, I don't need the apology. That was an apology enough.
What were you doing and where were you at when you found out he was elected?
I was at the home of a retired professor, Gene Madison, and his wife, and had many faculty people who were around my age group. And it was a room full of majority black senior citizen and almost senior citizens. How about that?
Okay.
And it was so interesting how it happened. It's just sort of like they said, he's now the next president. And we were like hollering and screaming and crying. And then suddenly there was this quietness that happened. The sort of quietness of, this is a new day. Did America finally come through?
Yeah.
I can't believe I lived long enough. The first person I did was call my friend Lerma, who I'd been in jail with, the bullpen with.
Yeah.
She's the very first person, picked up the phone, and her mother, who was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement in Orangeburg, happens to still be there, and I talked to her. I was sad that my mother wasn't with me, because we had gone to jail, walked down in the demonstrations hand in hand, and she wasn't here with me, literally. I think here with me in spirit, of course, but not literally. And it was, sort of sad, but it means a lot to me. I think what I like even more so about it is for people to see a loving Black family. You know, people have a lot of negative ideas about what a Black family is, but this is the kind of Black family I know of. This is the kind of Black family I came from. I love the fact that they're kind of touchy-feely. You know, a little kiss here and a little squeeze here. We need a little more of that in families, and I think that's a very good role model. And that shouldn't have anything to do with Blackness, has to do with family. And I just think it's something very neat. And I think that there's a lot of pride on the faces of Americans, even the ones that didn't vote for him.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to see. I mean, when Condoleezza Rice came out to make an announcement about something and then had to say how proud she was, and she's a staunch Republican, but yet to her, it was an amazing achievement in this country. It made me very proud. Doesn't mean our work is over.
Right.
We still got to do some work, but wow, I guess it was worth it.
Yeah. You say that there's still lots of work to be done, and that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. You've done an incredible amount of work with social activism in theater and social outreach, particularly with what was formerly Black Action Theater and what you renamed Darwin Turner Action Theater after Professor Darwin Turner. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what DTAT does and your role in it?
Well, DTAT does exactly what you just said. We perform material that hopes will evoke discussion about those difficult things, such as sexism, racism, sexual harassment. I mean, those things that are those difficult conversations. Right. We do plays and theater that will help get people talking about those difficult things. I mean, a lot of people say I do this social outreach thing, Kelly, but really, I don't think I do social. I just think it's the nature of the work I do, period.
Right.
As a theater artist, I have never done theater that doesn't have some meaning to us today.
Yeah.
It's everything I do is social outreach. I did one of the main stage plays I did once upon a time, In the Blood. And In the Blood deals with homelessness. And I wanted to make a point of that, but it doesn't just happen in New York. We have a homelessness problem in Iowa City. Yeah. So I made sure that as we did this play, that the audience was constantly made aware of homelessness in Iowa City and some of the issues. So DTAT's just another group that really specifically does that, but all the work I do anyway is political, and I think I can't do theater just because that's a good play,
right,
or just because it'll bring in an audience, just because it's fun. I don't do, the choices I make for plays have a lot to do with either teaching our history or helping to make a change, helping to shake up somebody, helping maybe to massage your heart or so. That's just sort of what I do. And Darwin Turner just happens to be the group that does it more directly.
Right.
And you know, utilizing techniques, you know, where we might do a 10-minute script in hand reading about the life of what it's like being a senior citizen and some of the issues for a senior, and do it for a group where we can finally talk about it after the 10-minute play. I mean, it's just that simple.
You had been quoted as calling it your ministry, being involved in theater.
Yeah.
How does that tie back to your feelings as a Christian and with your family background in ministry?
Well, ministry to me is another word for passion. It's like, to me, the passion is your ministry. If I just somehow believe that everybody's here to do something and have the ability to do something to make a difference. And the way you do that is by cluing in on that thing that is passionate for you. You know, you don't get a degree in something because you'll get a job. You get a degree in something just so you can become more enlightened about the world and what's out there, you know. And to me, passion is your ministry. That is your ministry. And does it come from my Christian background? I guess so. But I just always tell my students or ask them, what is your passion? What are you passionate about? And my kids the same way. They'll tell you that Mama always told us to follow our passion. I mean,
Yeah.
they all in the arts, unfortunately. No, fortunately, they're all in the arts. They followed their passion. And the ones that are out there are doing very well in the arts.
Do you have a particular piece that's your favorite that you've done throughout your many years of directing and being a part of productions?
Medea.
Medea.
I did a production of Medea that I had done research on for over 20 years. And it was supposed to be my thesis for my MFA. I was supposed to do it here at the University of Iowa. But it just happened that when it came time for me to do it as a thesis, I got hired by Spelman College. I had to go take the job at Spelman. I did my thesis at Spelman, and it wasn't Medea. So it took me years to finally get to do it, and I finally did it when I was at University of Northern Iowa. And I was very happy. It was something, I mean, ultimately, I would love to take Greek tragedies and do every last one of them. Because one of the things about the Greek tragedy that I'm always feeling is left out is people don't realize that there are a lot of Africanisms and African influences in the Greek tragedy. And so I've always wanted to do all the Greek tragedies so that people can see where those Africanisms might be.
Yeah.
So Medea is the only one I've done so far. I would like to do some more.
Yeah. So you were at UNI as well for a little bit of time.
I was there for 8 years, yeah.
For 8 years.
To be quite honest, the reason we ended up back in Iowa, I was at Spelman, right? And I just didn't like the Atlanta school system. And I was concerned that I was going to have to pay private school education for my kids. I had 3 kids to get through school, and I'm paying college education, you know, money in elementary and nursery school already. You know, how do you? So finally, we decided that we were going to go back to where the best schools were, and they were in Iowa. So I only applied to work in Iowa.
Yeah.
So when it was time to go to another job, I only applied in Iowa, and I actually had about 3 job offers in the state. But it was because we wanted our kids to have the best public school education. And now as I look at it, you know, when you see the Iowa schools having trouble and having to deal with some of the issues that other schools have already been dealing with, you know we are really in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the big things Obama talked about is doing something about the American educational system, because it is a mess. I mean, it really is. I mean, sometimes we're in Iowa City and we forget.
Right.
Because we have still good schools here, but that's...
What else is out there?
But, oh my God, we're in trouble. Our kids are not... I mean, I can tell the difference by students that are coming into the classroom. I mean, I'm actually getting students in the classroom that are not able to read. Yes. So when you start seeing that, that's scary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do. Back to what I said. Just because we have this black president doesn't mean it's all over. I've heard people say, should we get rid of affirmative action? Should we get rid of this? No, we haven't finished doing our work. No. But at least that's showing us what we could do, what we could become.
Exactly.
It gives us hope.
Now, a motif that I've sensed throughout this interview is you keep going back to family. What does your family mean to you, both your roots and your current family right now?
Family.
It's a loaded question, isn't it?
Well, you know, ultimately, you know, when you ask who I am, I'm a theater artist, but more than that, I'm a mother. And if you had to ask me what's the best thing I've ever done, I gave birth to 4 of the most wonderful kids, and it means so much more to me. Of course, the plays I direct are my children as well. So family is, I guess because I don't really have much family other than my children. My mother's gone, my father's gone. I was the only grandchild for years, and so I've been separated from people. So there's no one around my age group. And a family that started off with children out of slavery that had 11 children. We have children like I'm the only child. You know, there's no other people. And so I think for that reason, even more so, it's important. I'm very proud of the family I've come from because I was fortunate to have the kind of devotion to education, love, and spiritual needs. I didn't grow up poor. You know, I didn't grow up poor little black child, no. On one side of the family, they were black aristocrats in Oklahoma. And on the other side of the family, they were very educated, upper middle class. I'm from the black bourgeoisie. I do a one-woman show, or at least I did a one-woman show a year ago, and that's what people kept talking about is, you know, this story that I have is a little different than what some of them had seen. It's not different from what I've seen. I know other people like me. But the fact that, you know, here I am, a black woman, coming out of the South, coming out of segregation, the Civil Rights Movement, but I didn't grow up poor. But yet, I still had to go through some of the same oppressive situations that everyone else went through. I'm fortunate in that way. Also, in the play, the one-woman show, I play piano. And the other thing they say that's intriguing, I don't sit down and play jazz. I don't sit down and play gospel. I'm playing classical music because that's what I do. I had some of the best training in classical music was right here at the University of Iowa. Because while my mother was getting a PhD in piano performance, I was studying under her teachers as well. Had excellent training here at the University of Iowa in music. So, yes, family is important, and I am very proud to come from the family I've come from. I can never, you know, it's like, in my mother's memorial, I remember, because you know how when you're a kid, you always put your mother's clothes on? I could always wear my mother's clothes, but my mama was like 5 feet.
Really?
And had a 4-foot shoe, like, what was it, 5? She wore a size 5.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Little tiny foot. And I remember the memorial, as I spoke at the memorial, I said, I could always wear my mother's clothes, but I never could fit her shoes. And I didn't realize that that's true.
Yeah.
I never could fit her shoes. If only I could just get a toe in one of her shoes. So what I've done is just a little bit, but, oh, honey, I come from black women in particular that have left me and my daughter now. This row of women that, you know, just fascinating.
Remarkable. It's really remarkable. A little intrigued now about this one-woman show. I'd heard a little bit about it. So this is different from the one-woman show that you were a part of in Minnesota, correct?
Which one was in Minnesota?
The one.
Oh no, yeah, Sister Sanji. That's 1970s.
Okay,
that's way back. Yeah.
So this is one that you created.
This
correct?
is my own one-woman show that's autobiographical. Yes.
Yeah.
And I did it during Martin Luther King's week. I did the first public performance of it during the week, and I haven't gone back to it, but I'll get back to it again.
Yeah.
At some point. Yeah.
Now, you've been on sabbatical this last year, this last semester. What all have you been doing, and what all are you planning on doing for the rest of your time off?
Well, it's getting toward the end. I have an interest in researching in your backyard the roots of African American theater history. What I mean by your own backyard, instead of going to New York and looking at all the research about theater in New York, why not look in Iowa and see what kind of things that black people were doing in theater in the state of Iowa? Why not look in New Orleans? You might find more stuff.
Right.
And I started off doing New Orleans, and I ended up discovering in antebellum time 2 theaters run by free people of color in antebellum New Orleans, along with actors and designers that are not in our history books at all. So my goal is to get them into the history book. So on the leave, I've been adding Iowa and Oklahoma trying to find that kind of information. And over the leave, I spent a lot of time in New Orleans trying to finish doing some of the research there. And I just delivered a paper this past December 1st, Monday, on theatrical activities of free people of color in the New Orleans symposium that we had on campus just this past Monday. I have continued working on chronicling the activities of Black Action Theater, which doesn't exist anymore. But Black Action Theater, when it did exist, at least twice during the school year, you had plays done, 2 plays done by Black playwrights from 1968 on till about 8 years ago.
Right.
So somebody needs to chronicle that history. So that's what I've been doing.
Now, I also hear that you're looking toward going into retirement soon. Now, what's going to be in store for you when you retire as a professor?
I plan to start a theater in New Orleans.
Yes?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do and have always wanted to do, to have a professional theater in New Orleans. Even more so now, a theater that is for New Orleans, about New Orleans, plays written about New Orleans, plays written by people from Louisiana, plays that might be very important for New Orleans people to hear. And I want a theater that will help embrace the culture and history of New Orleans. I think more than anything, it needs to be done now since Katrina.
Right.
The young people need to be able to embrace that history, but America needs to embrace the history of New Orleans because, New Orleans is the most African city in the United States. And so much of what we consider American came out of New Orleans. Jazz, okay? And to just let New Orleans just go like that we've got to, I think it's important for tourists and as well as the people of New Orleans to be able to embrace who they are. And I want a theater that will do that.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I even have kind of a name I'm playing around with called Everything New Orleans, Tout Théâtre Nouvelle Orléans.
Beautiful.
Everything New Orleans Theater Company.
I like that.
Yeah, because that's kind of what the focus is. I mean, it doesn't mean I can't say I want to do piano lesson. If piano lesson has something to say to the people of New Orleans, then I'll do it.
Lesson.
But mostly I will be trying to do plays by writers from Louisiana as well. Because being here at Iowa, we're all about new plays.
Right.
So I can't help but, encourage new play development by writers of New Orleans, about New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, there's a question that I like to ask all of our guests. What book, play, or piece of literature can our audience members read so they can be able to understand you a little bit better?
Okay, I think that's a question I can't answer. I mean, I'm still trying to understand myself better. But a book that I really think is very important that meant a lot to me that I couldn't put down was Native Son by Richard Wright. That book blew my mind when I read it the first time. And I think anybody that's considered an educated person when they get ready to come to college should have read that as part of that list of books.
Native Son.
By Richard Wright.
By Richard Wright. Whenever I do these conversations, I've been making a list and looking for the books afterwards.
Yeah, you're just looking for books to read.
I am. Well,
because that's a hard question to ask.
But I think that you can kind of understand someone a little better based on what literature has touched them and what pieces have touched them.
Maybe. I just think that I like that because if anything explains the nature of what oppression can do to a human being,
it's that book.
That book does it very well. I'm just trying to think, I can't come up with a book that explains me because
that's okay. I think
I'm still looking for, as I said, I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah, I think that in itself is very representative about what you feel passionate about.
Yes.
I think that's definitely representative of that. So we're getting close to the end of our time on the show. Is there anything else that you want the audience to know about you or anything they want to hear about your history?
I can't think of anything else. I think I pretty much talked a lot. Did you think of anything I left out? No. I like cherries, chocolate-covered cherries, more than anything. I'm allergic to strawberries and penicillin and sulfur. Uh,
You in a
I,
nutshell.
you know, I have wonderful children. No, I think that there are things that are really personal that, of course, we're not going to talk about, but
Right.
that's it.
Well, it's been so great to talk to you, Tish.
Thank
I've
you.
had a great time with you on the show, and I hope you all have enjoyed our interview as well. So please catch us next time on Women at Iowa.